What does he not say here? That's a hard question.
Freedom.
Yeah, he doesn't say freedom. And what else does he not say?
And say slavery is wrong.
Yeah, he doesn't say that slavery is wrong. Okay? Why did he not say that slavery was wrong?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. I don't know that Paul actually recognized the moral problem with slavery. Okay? Now, part of the deal is when you're immersed in a culture, it's very difficult to see the moral problems that are part of that culture. I mean, it takes a real kind of act of concentration and deliberation and even detachment. Okay? I think the question, how could Paul have accepted the legitimacy of slavery, is that he was so deeply enmeshed in that system, he could not imagine a world without slaves. Okay? That seems to be the issue here. He tries to ameliorate it. He knows an individual slave owner. He can appeal to him out of friendship if he knows an individual slave. He can appeal, out of compassion or something. But he never questions the legitimacy of slavery itself. Now, here's the question for you, because remember, we don't only query Paul, we query ourselves, right? Let's stipulate that slavery in antiquity was an oppressive institution, right? What are the oppressive institutions in your experience?
Church.
And I will, well, let's be thoughtful about our answer, okay? In the sense that an oppressive institution would be one that inhibits the full flourishing of the human person. I mean, that's the kind of classical answer to what oppression amounts to, okay? If you are, for instance, prevented from getting an education, okay? There will be some oppressive force that's responsible for your being prevented from getting an education, all right? If you are unable to get adequate health care, okay? We would identify that as an oppressive force that would stand in your way of getting health care. See what I mean? And now we presume that things like education and health care help the human person to flourish, right? Hard to flourish when you can't get an education and you can't develop your mind. It's hard to flourish when your teeth are hurting, or you've got an appendectomy or something that needs to be taken care of, or appendicitis needs to be taken care of, and you can't afford the surgery. So in that sense, and I don't mean, when I say institutions, maybe I should have said forces here. What are those things in our culture that prevent or impede the full flourishing of the human person?
Divorce.
I think divorce does.
Economics.
Some economic systems, maybe. I saw another hand up, yeah.
Some of the criminal justice system.
Some of the criminal justice systems. I mean, we talk about, there's a lot of talk here, especially in St. Louis, of the school to prison pipeline. So that you've got a kind of collusion, if you will, between educational institutions and prison officials to pretty much kind of send people on a track that will end them in the penitentiary. Okay? What else?
Racism, sexism.
Racism, sexism.
Whatever force causes abortion.
Whatever force is causing abortion. And there is an interesting correlation between economic prosperity and abortion. Okay? When times are good, people have fewer abortions, which is really quite interesting to me. What else?
I like that about churches, like male clergy.
Male-dominated clergy. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Parts of the consumer culture.
Yeah. Parts of a consumer culture where some people exist so that I can be dressed comfortably and cheaply. Now, I don't know how it is at WashU, because I don't spend much time over here, but at SLU, interestingly, and probably because of the influence of kind of Ignatian spirituality and so forth, the students are very aware of sweatshops. And they'll have you walk across campus, and you know, occasionally there'll be, especially in good weather like we've had the last couple of days, there'll be booths set up outside, sort of showing students that certain lines of clothing are made by people who are paid an inadequate wage or are chained in some cases to the benches in which they're assembling the stuff, and it gets sold at, and they'll even name the retailers. So they'll encourage students to boycott certain brands and certain retailers, because in the end, you're party in that respect to a system that exploits people. Okay? Yeah.
The media.
How would you say the media is an oppressive force?
I think it is divisive, and I think that it separates people from like their fellow neighbors, because people just kind of go in their living rooms and turn on the TV, and that's a substitute for like public life now.
Yeah, right. I heard another analysis that says garages that where you enter from the alley have contributed to, and I've got one of those, contributed to the alienation of neighbor to neighbor. Because you used to park in the street and then walk up in your front porch, and you'd see your neighbor parking in the front, you know, you'd at least wave to one another. And it's true on my street, and I, you know, live in Tower Grove. It's a cool area of the city. I've made it my point of meeting my neighbors, but truthfully, there are days that go by and I don't see them because we're all sort of driving in and out of our garages. Yeah. Now I don't turn the TV on when I get on. I get home. I'm a music guy. Okay? Just so you know. Were you going to say something? No. Okay. What are some other forces that inhibit the full flourishing of the human person?
What about the unequal educational systems where some people have so much and some have so little?
That's so little. And the ones that have so little never, ever get a shot.
There's no way out.
Yeah, there's no way out. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I don't like living in St. Louis. I've been here for 15 years. There is a really very fine Catholic educational system here, both of parochial schools and of private schools. But here's one of the kind of savage ironies. The very effectiveness of that system of schools has taken families out of public schools who ordinarily, I think, would have worked to make those public schools better. You know? Now, I don't know how it is in a place like, you know, Clayton or Ladue or somewhere like that. I'm thinking about the city of St. Louis, where I've always lived, and the city schools are really pretty desperate. You know, I mean, if I had children, I would probably try to keep them, you know, out of the city schools, mostly because, you know, then I want them to have a shot at getting educated at a place like SLU or WashU or somewhere like that. You know. You see what I mean? We get so close to these things sometimes, it's very difficult to get enough distance and to say, well, yeah, clearly this is wrong, and this needs to be fixed. Because the other piece that gets to be really problematic is, yes, you can identify oppressive forces or institutions in culture, but then coming up with a solution is extraordinarily difficult. Who knows? You probably need somebody who's an undergraduate in history, maybe European history. When was slavery finally abolished? Yeah.
I mean, are you, like, it depends on the location, and are you defining serfdom as slavery, or like?
Well, you know, serfs were not really free to leave the land, were they?
No.
The land could be bought and sold, but the serf was really kind of part of the transaction. So it was a form of slavery.
Yeah. So then, really, in practice, you can make an argument to like the early 20th century.
Early 20th century, yeah. I mean, in America, what was our effective date?
1865.
Yeah, 1865, generally. And we say the Emancipation Proclamation, though technically that only freed the slaves in those areas still under Confederate rule, but I mean, it's a convenient date, okay? We'll say 1865. But Paul, we're saying here in the, we'll just imagine that Philemon is written, let's say, in the year 64, shortly before his death. Somewhere in there, early 60s. It would take then another 1,800 years for humanity to see that slavery was a moral problem. okay? 1,800 years, almost 2 millennia. And we're still, frankly, paying the price for that here in America. You know, here we are. You don't have to be, you know, a radical to say that a lot of the issues we grapple with in terms of these things you talked about, education or even media or whatever else, are outcomes of what people refer to as America's original sin, admitting slaves here in the 1600s, okay, adopting slavery as a way of life. And it's true that in other parts of the world, slavery or its equivalent persisted even later. I guess serfdom in the strict sense of the term in Russia was really abolished with the Russian Revolution, was it not?
Yeah, practically.
So, like 1917?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, you said, yeah,
I would add that with like the amount of human trafficking that still goes on, that
it's a form of slavery. Absolutely. There's a sign, it's one of those, you know, wonderful backlit, like billboards, but it's inside the airport. When you're waiting for your luggage, that says, "This is the face of human trafficking." And it shows a guy who's sitting in front of a sewing machine, you know, and he looks sort of desperate, and he may have to go to the bathroom, and it may be a posed shot, but the idea is that this guy is not really able to flourish in this crappy job he has assembling, you know, sweaters or whatever it is he's making, sportswear. You know, a lot of your sportswear is actually made in sweatshops, okay? We tend to think of human trafficking as a kind of euphemism for prostitution, and sometimes it is, but there's also economic trafficking. It's a very, very big deal in Texas, where I lived for such a long time, where people are taken across the border by the so-called coyotes, and taken to some sweatshop, oftentimes in a big city like Houston or Dallas or Austin or Fort Worth, and basically virtually chained to a bench where they oftentimes do piecework. So yeah, it's a form of slavery, okay? It's illegal, and maybe that's the difference. In this world, and in the world we're talking about that ended in 1917 in Russia or in 1865 here in the United States, it was still legal. At least now, we know it's wrong even though we still do it, okay? All right, see my point? It's hard to identify these things, and even more hard to find a solution, okay? So, we can hardly blame Paul, but here's the question. We'll just take one of the easy things, like the sweatshop stuff. How is it we find it possible to accept the legitimacy of, let's say, sweatshops?
So getting something.
Yeah, we want this stuff.
Yeah, we want the stuff. We want it cheap. We want it comfortable. You know? Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was talking to a student yesterday about this, and she was saying, yeah, but if that job wasn't there, this person would have no way to make money. So there's a way people look at it from different
We can
perspectives.
rationalize.
and to the same end, if on our end, if you don't have a job here, you still need clothes. You know, you can't necessarily afford $100 shirt. You can afford a $4 shirt.
Yeah, right.
Well, and just on a practical level, our society's gotten so complex that, you know, if I'm going to Target to shop for my kids, I don't necessarily even know how I would go about researching where the 34 objects I'm about to buy were produced and if there were humane conditions.
Right. I mean, granted, you probably have Google on your phone, but Google doesn't know everything, does it? You know? You can hardly look up the brand and say, you know, is this made in a sweatshop somewhere, because Google might not actually know that. And I'm absolutely, utterly in sympathy with these things. What else? What else makes it possible for us to accept the legitimacy of oppressive cultures or forces?
Yeah, I would say like education and like, I'm thinking specifically about academia. I think that like college culture definitely has like, it really tries to impress certain perspectives on you. So like I'm thinking a lot about like abortion, and like the SU president just signed a letter to like plan, like basically denouncing cuts to Planned Parenthood. And yeah, on WashU's campus, it's just like it's like a given that you're pro-choice, and they, like, people think of Planned Parenthood as like the standard bearer for, I guess, like, I don't even know, like civil rights and social justice. So
Right.
that is just like shoved down people's throats on this
Right.
campus.
Here's, there's what you say, in fact, as you kind of provokes a thought in me. Oftentimes, while in education, like the kind you would get at WashU or St. Louis University or Notre Dame, where I went, can teach you critical thinking skills, it also imbues us with a sense of privilege. Or a term, and that's the term that gets used oftentimes in political discourse today. In my generation, it would have been called entitlement, okay? A sense of entitlement that says, well, I'm a Notre Dame grad, you know, and I deserve certain things. I deserve the good life, and I deserve the comfortable home, and the, you know, late model car, and I deserve to send my children to a school like the one that I went to. And the entitlements or privileges that we had are seen not actually as, I mean, quote unquote privileges, but actual rights. Well, of course my son will go to, I mean, name whatever your elite school is supposed to be, because that's where I went, you know. Entitlement tends to blind us to, frankly, the oppressive forces that give us the place that we enjoy in society, okay? I mean, and that's a hard truth to have to swallow, because, let's face it, I mean, your teachers, Gary, your parents, everybody want you to do well at Washington University. And we want you to do well and good, of course, once you finish, and you move on to whatever life has next, right? And then we want you to contribute to the Catholic Student Center and, you know, probably to Washington University as well. But I mean, you know, everybody wishes you every success in this world, but here's the point. With that kind of goodwill that's supporting you now, and presumably for many years to come, the danger or the shadow side to all that is this privilege or entitlement that tends to blind us to these oppressive forces and institutions. Yeah, Phil.
It seems another thing to me is that there's a sense of it's okay because everybody's doing it, and it's been going on 10,000 years. And so, you know, there's diminished responsibility.
Right.
Because it's all corporate.
Well, what, you know, it's the thing that makes me particularly crazy. People will misconstrue what they'll quote Jesus correctly. They'll misconstrue what he means. They'll say, well, the poor you'll always have with you. Which, you know, doesn't mean throw up your hands because it's impossible ever to deal with it. Instead, Jesus, I mean, he's making a case there, is the poor you will always have with you, you will not always have me, and as obligatory as the cry of the poor is, a major obligation of the teaching of Jesus, his presence is even that much more obligatory, okay? So, I mean, he's really making an extraordinary claim for himself, but he's not diminishing the claims that the poor make on this. Okay, now, you see where I'm going with all of this. You know, I'm not here to condemn Paul, because, to quote Paul, in condemning Paul, I would be condemning myself, you know? I mean, in other words, for him it was slavery. I think we've got more moral clarity where slavery is concerned today. I think where we probably could do with some real moral, you know, kind of analysis is on some of these other forces that privilege some and, what's the word I want, oppress others, you know? And that's gonna take some hard work, and it's gonna take some smart people, and I'm looking at a bunch of them right here in this room, okay? And you don't have to major in sociology or economics or critical theory or something like that. Anybody who's got a good mind in his or her, you know, head should be able to kind of help figure out answers to this kind of